Welcome to this month in cybersecurity. This is the October 2018 edition. As you know, we come to you for 30 minutes each month and try to look at four newsworthy stories, break them down for small and medium businesses, and just try and figure out how we can learn from either worldly events and things that are happening around us, and hopefully protect our organizations better because of it. We always start the same way, which is trying to frame some of these discussions in terms of security frameworks that are known and loved. Our organization happens to use NIST cybersecurity framework as part of our talking points. So some of the problems and issues we might have might be in one of these five sectors, though I think we find the next framework, which is the same framework, a little bit better for a couple reasons. One is detection there is right at the heart of things. We believe strongly that consoles that can help tell you about problems that are occurring and being notified about issues is part of the secret sauce there in the middle. And obviously everything on the left always starts with identifying what is it you want to protect. And because it's not possible, I guess, in today's world, given constrained budgets and so forth, to protect everything as deeply as we'd like to. And to that point, the third item we like about this is that notice how prevention and reaction are equal portions of the window here. So I think that's kind of helpful from a conversational standpoint. A lot of people put all of their eggs in the protect bucket and spend very little on their disaster recovery plans or on incident response plans or even on risk assessments or business impact assessments, things that might be in identify bucket or the recover bucket. They tend to lapse on those and just go off and spend a lot on technology controls. So we're here to just kind of set the scene that security is a large framework, and this discussion hopefully is just a portion of it. So here's a couple stories from the month, good old month of October. We should note that certainly around the October 5th timeframe, news broke, I think from Business Week was the one that broke the story, but basically was talking about chips being installed in servers. To much chagrin, roiled in that was Amazon and Apple, who basically wanted retractions of the story in that they thought it might be impactful to business. But long story short is, it certainly was all over the news in terms of the hacking, and I think it's worthwhile to have a discussion with that as a framework about third-party suppliers. The product here, which isn't very well named on the screen, but if you kind of looked at that, it just looks like a pricing grid, right? No, I'll just buy that, right? And it's certainly there are legitimate tools that are available to purchase that are available in the marketplace. This one in particular happens to be called Agent Tesla. But the story is that there's a spectrum of software that's offered and available out there on the web, and just to make sure, what are your users buying and downloading? A little discussion about that. Heavy in the news, and with heavy hearts, obviously, we go out to those that have been in receipt of mail through the postal system and otherwise bomb scares, right? And so we'll call this the bomb scare story. And I guess I want to use that as an analogy to other technologies that are available for, potentially less physically damaging, but equally damaging things such as email protection. And we'll kind of walk through and talk about bomb scares in that regard. Fourth and final story was around video privacy. These are obviously a picture of a camera, although it could be cameras of all types. I've got a few other notable stories, but I think why don't we start with those four and see where we get to. So let's start with the big hack, third-party suppliers, and kind of talking about that. Third-party suppliers, and I think the story as this goes here is that an organization known as Supermicro makes motherboards. They're essentially, they supply a lot of motherboards to a lot of organizations. And I think the quote in the upper right was appropriate for kind of understanding that, yeah, I never really thought about where motherboards come from, just as you might not have even thought of nowadays where the operating system it kind of comes from. Obviously, it all comes from one single spot, or if motherboards are all coming from one general location, then there's a supply chain risk. And I'm going to kind of talk about it generically as just that, a supply chain risk. And effectively, what's happened is that that little chip that you see there at the end of the finger, to kind of give you a flavor for how small it is, in some cases was being inserted allegedly into super micro servers. This allowed for the physical inspection, or a physical inspection would show that sometimes this was on Ethernet connectors or otherwise, and it would essentially allow a change in code would allow it to enter the the computer's CPU, and opening the door to outside attack. So sometimes it would be able to communicate out. There were sometimes strange communication patterns. Some of these computers entered some very dangerous areas from a U.S. government perspective. There was claims that it was in Amazon. There was claims it was in a telecom manufacturer who claimed they actually saw this stuff back in 2015. Even Amazon had discovered this when they were putting in their Prime Video service. They discovered this spy chip in some computers. So it kind of surfaced back then, and it's kind of snowballed, but it really came to light this past month here. So that said, I think in general it just kind of gives us pause to. I don't think there's much we can do, right? From a threat perspective, obviously, if we have the wherewithal to go inspect all of our computers, great. But I think in general we're kind of waiting for this problem to be solved. But certainly, I think it raises the profile of kind of where do we get stuff from, right? And not only hardware, I think that's mentioned there, but I think in general I'm going to talk about software. Where do we get software from? And there's some third-party software out there, and we've got more examples of this. But even in previous this month in cybersecurities, in 2017, there were some cleaners that we had talked about. CCleaner, which turned out to be some bad code. Effectively, was lopped on to that utility. Just this month, there were two stories that surfaced about Python programming. Had an add-on called Colorama. I don't think a lot of us are coders and download this, but Colorama is spelled regular color, AMA, and a variant of that, color OURAMA, was inserted in there that people were downloading, and effectively is malware that allowed remote control of machines. Similar to that program Vesta CP on GitHub, which effectively had a little VB script at the end of it, which would take your admin credentials and send it back to Vesta. It was just inserted in there, essentially just bad code. So the thought is to kind of where we get our software from and where we get our hardware from. To some degree, we have to control the supply chain, and it kind of gives us thought as to how do we know, what we're doing in this space, and do we manage effectively enough our own vendors and supplies? And so it brings up the idea of vendor management. So this would be a kind of on the solution side, what can you do? And so we would offer to our customers and would offer that you should be doing things like this. You should be creating policies, right, about what it is you want to control about the supply chain. How are you going to control it? Who's chartered to do it? What are the actions you're going to take, and why are you doing it? You'd have things like questionnaires, such as how do I maintain that the vendors that are still financially solvent, are that they have good policies in place for protection of my data, if indeed they're chartered for my data. You might have things like worksheets to kind of work through, which of my vendors is at higher risk? Who am I giving more data to? Who has more access to my systems? Things of this nature are all part of a vendor management program. And even ongoing performance. So if you've ranked them year one and you've discovered that vendor A happens to be a low risk and has access to low amounts of data, how about next 6 months or the next year? So if you're chartered to put into place something about third-party suppliers or vendor management programs, certainly reach out and get help in this space. We have people that are chartered on our team to do nothing but this, and have put together dozens of vendor management programs for organizations to evaluate third-party chains. So that's really all I had to say on that. I think just helpful to understand in context that the big hack, as it's being called, and is still an unfolding issue, and certainly is a discussion on supply chain management. All right. Second was, kind of in a similar manner. If you'll recall back maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I think it was in the July timeframe, we had a problem with some software that was called Luminosity. It was out there, available for people to download, and they had something like 80,000 downloads of this software. This software, as it turned out, was malware, right? It was just widely available, and people were using it because it allowed the remote chat and messages in the upper left-hand corner. So it looks like a product. It looks like a legitimate product, but under the hood, it's effectively malware. And as it turned out, the person for Luminosity, or the organization behind it, was found liable, and just recently several people were put in jail about it. Well, along comes something very similar, right? The next one waiting in the wings. I just want to make sure. All software in general, in my opinion, kind of falls on a spectrum of trust. Hey, this is software from Microsoft. I trust it. This is software from Adobe. I trust it. Well, then you start getting into software from, go to my PC. Okay, maybe that is software that you trust. Sure, that's remote control software. How about VNC? Well, that's been freeware, and that's been out there for a long time, and a lot of people use it. Is that trustworthy? Well, maybe. So again, everything's kind of on a spectrum. There's also LogMeIn software. And along that same spectrum, there's something called Agent Tesla. Pretty widely used out in the industry, ironically. And just this month, the gentleman that created the software for Agent Tesla was out there writing blogs that had become available through the FBI investigations for how to manipulate his own software, the Agent Tesla agents, which are out there. And by the way, there are 60,000 of these agents, not quite as big as Luminosity, but 60,000 computers with this, hopefully not yours, where this software, yes, it does remote control software, and it's very helpful for that. Oh, and by the way, it also has advanced keyloggers and cryptors, and the blogs that he was writing was for how to take over complete control of the machines unknowingly under the hood, or to siphon data off of those machines. So when you start blogging about that as a software developer, you start raising attention, and his software, kind of rose attention to FBI, and effectively he was caught this month. But so I think there's diligence that has to be paid in software that's being deployed, and certainly you have to have knowledge as to what's going on your machine. And so to that end, there's knowledge about kind of when customers ask us to help them evaluate what's going on in their machines, we do one of two things. We either run a MAPS tool, which is Microsoft's free tool, has its own certificate. We know it's from Microsoft, all of those good things, but we run the MAPS tool to let them know as a one-time inventory, here's what we saw in your machines. Oftentimes this is done from a licensing perspective if people are concerned about that, but also could be used to evaluate third-party programs such as Luminosity or Agent Tesla. If people are more interested in a kind of a longer term solution, oftentimes they're investing in SCCM, and I drew up a graphic here of just an SCCM infrastructure that's for 2012, which is older technology at this point, but the architecture is the same. Effectively, you're putting an agent in place that's consistently giving you up-to-date inventory information back to a SQL database. It also has a lot more capabilities than inventory, but that's the tool of choice for most organizations for running those inventory assessments. So, you might start thinking about the go to my PCs and the VNCs and LogMeIns, and I guess I'd get down to a level of how about all the software that users are now downloading by themselves, right? In addition to down to their machines, they're also leveraging cloud applications. And so how are you looking at and evaluating web applications, SaaS-based, with a browser where people are accessing this stuff? And to do that, we're leveraging tools and leveraging a nice database called Microsoft Cloud App Security to effectively look at firewall logs and scrutinize who's going where, who's using what applications, how long are they using the applications. And the best part of it is kind of illustrated on the screen, or at least a little snippet. is the database they have. So the database takes every application that's available that's SaaS-based, it puts it into categories. So you could see how many remote control type tools are out there, and which ones are being used by your users. So Tesla, the Agent Tesla application would be in there. How many are using file storage? There are 44 different file storage providers. So obviously the Googles and the OneDrives and Box and Dropbox, but then there's a bunch of other peripheral ones, right, that you might not know about and certainly might not approve. So in any case, those 14,000 applications are categorized here and from a risk perspective are judged so you can kind of get a perspective on what's risky in your environment. All right, kind of moving on to story 3. Certainly don't mean to trivialize what's occurring or what has occurred and what kind of continues to occur. I guess I want to use this as an analogy and a backdrop. The alleged bomber is Caesar Sayoc Jr., who sent pipe bombs to 14 locations, I believe, at this time. Those packages traveled through processing facilities and either arrived at their final destination or didn't arrive, but they certainly all went through a processing facility. And it appears that some of the processing facilities were more diligent about package handling, especially in light of the personnel, some of the personnel they were going to. So where an actor might have received a package in his mail, the politician or former politicians may not have because packages to them might have gone through extra scrutiny. It's that sort of example, I guess, I want to use to kind of keep drawing upon. The processing facilities are obviously very good at detecting suspicious packages. They have their own checklists of kind of what to look for. There's been training involved. They have an incident response plan. They have a notification amongst other processing facilities. All of these things are great conduits, if you will, to kind of go into technology that we've kind of talked about before, but if you haven't heard it, this is called advanced threat protection. And very similar to mail packages, let's take a look at the way email is done today. Well, email is obviously, hygiene cleaned by your favorite cleaner, whether it be, an on-prem scanner or a cloud-based scanner for Office 365. It's Exchange Online Protection, and that takes care of the day-to-day spam and antivirus. But what advanced threat protection throws on top of that are two technologies for protecting against malicious links or malicious attachments, obviously appropriately named safe links or safe attachments. As the sender's mail comes through the processing facility known as Office 365, that attachment, if there is one there, will go through extra processing in a detonation chamber where things are scrupulated and things are blown up, if you will, virtually, so that they can see what happened to the file, what changes are occurring. If it's safe, it continues on to the person's mailbox. If it's not safe, it obviously is thrown away, and the user is warned of such. Similar with links. These links are, if they point to dangerous websites, they are going to be processed away and not sent to the user or blocked. And if they're safe, they'll move on. So same sort of analogy, higher level of processing and training with the advanced threat protection. Additionally, and this is new in the last 6 months or so, and this is where I think we're seeing a lot of traction with this product in our implementations, is people are very concerned about phishing and business email compromise, which I've spoken on many times. The capability here is to evaluate impersonation. Who's trying to look like somebody? And this is where it gets very personal in that this is intended for individuals who might be subject to business email compromise or who might be most likely to be impersonated. You can imagine that at your organization that would be people like the C-suite or people that might be in accounting or their controller or certain business folks that have access to transfer money, transfer customer data, things of that nature. And so the implementation of this technology will highlight when someone is looking like someone that they shouldn't be. That means that they might have made a slight change in your domain or a slight change in your name, or it's just not acting the way that that person has acted before. You set up these protections on specific domains and then on specific people. And at this time, you're allowed to set it up on 60 people within your organization. So you can imagine you can probably profile the right people in your organization that might have the most interactions externally. Some of your HR folks would be great for this too. But this technology is available and helps evaluate who's sending to who and some of the relationships in order to get to a good frame and protection level. So again, kind of drawing that back to the packages that are being sent, better processing, a little more deeper knowledge with regards to who's sending to where, and highlighting for you as a protection mechanism. All right, and the kind of the fourth and final major story, I'll call it, is around cameras. And I wouldn't say that there's any individual story, but for anyone who's kind of watching the news or gets feeds, you're going to find that a lot of video or a lot of stories nowadays are supplemented with actual video footage, right? And this comes from the fact that our police are wearing body cameras, the first responder vehicles oftentimes have cameras. Personally, we have cameras / cell phones in our hands at all times. A lot of organizations have put in cameras. So the discussion really is not about one single story. It's about the totality that cameras are becoming a very integral part of our lives. And it just got me thinking that as a newsworthy story, that law enforcement certainly starting to take this in, and it starts to become necessary. Our organization has recently deployed a number of cameras within our organization, and as you go to think about, should we be using these for demonstration purposes and so forth, you realize that no, you really can't or shouldn't. There's a lot of privacy information that occurs within your organization. There's decisions that need to be made from a policy perspective in terms of getting approval, where should it be located, who's allowed to monitor that feed, either real time or the ability to get data long term. Is it integrated with other security protocols? Do you have do you have a policy around it? Let alone all the technology discussions around encrypted signals and if it's motion activated or what angle and zoom and things of that nature, where's all the stuff going to be stored? And then usage, right? Consoles, who's got access to the console? Can you do search? Can you export the video if needed? Can it record activity? So, on screen, the little example you have there is a little demo world we have using some cameras, ironically, in this case from Meraki, that are looking at their San Francisco office. You can see in the upper right, campus information, and one of them's looking out a window. So you can use the technology to actually count the cars. And you don't need to be sitting there looking at the live feed. You can actually ask the camera how many cars passed, today, or you can get alerted every time a car passed, which would be a lot of cars on this particular instance. So those are the types of things that I think are interesting to kind of think about as we kind of move into the camera thing. And I think it's also important to think that you're going to need some help and expertise when it comes to development of that policy, considering all the technology. And making sure you have a good experience outside of the product, right? It's not just throwing up a camera. And so to that end, we've done obviously dozens of projects in that space, and we're also starting to manage a lot of devices that happen to be cameras. We're managing 80 plus firewalls, hundreds of switches and routers, and several thousand workstations and servers. And now we're actually managing the setup of security cameras for our customers, including the design and setup, as well as as a managed service, patching, uptime, making sure things are healthy, storage, and administration of that. So, as you're embarking down there, just keep that in mind. If cameras seem to be the new frontier, if you will, with regards to physical security, though it's a technology that has been around for quite a while. A couple other honorable mentions with the 5 minutes we have remaining. This month was CyberSecurity Month. So we all have a shared responsibility. We only have a day and a half left of this month, but security awareness nomenclature hopefully has been out there and kind of resonating. And know that if you're looking for turnkey on-demand security training or phishing campaigns, that we actually have a free offering to do that at a one-time basis within your organization. Another notable, certainly I'd love to point you to Krebs on Security. If you haven't gone to them before, he usually puts out maybe 4 or 5 articles a month. This particular article he put out on October 25th, I would have loved to include this as a top story. It's just I include business email compromise so often, but here he's under the hood on what's happening with business email compromise and how are they solving the problem. There's a gentleman that created something called a BEC mailing list that actually got an award for helping the FBI and so forth with this $12 billion issue with a consortium of about 530 experts. It's a really interesting story and certainly makes you more fearful, if you will, about business email compromise and how it's not an easy problem to solve, and certainly something that technology such as security audit for Office 365 can help with. And we've got our weekly security audit, which has a free trial also on that. So I won't belabor that, but on the kind of last and final notable story, unfortunately this month was another bad month, if you will, or I guess good month if you're in the business of staying patched, but Microsoft had 50 security issues that were uncovered, and they also had a 0-day bug. Their patch, unfortunately, when some of their patches, when deployed, one of them caused a major challenge in the first day or two of this patch being released. So it might be logical to inject a little time in your procedures as that patch actually deleted some files on your machine, or it kind of hid those files, and they were difficult to recover, I guess. So we were fortunate in that although we patch 1,900 systems a month through our managed services team, that we do have good procedures and didn't have any customers that we inflicted pain on, but certainly we're able to educate our customers about that problem and help them recover files in those instances. So couple stories there for you to highlight. Do know that we have events ongoing. I think another 3 webinars in the next 2 weeks, one on Office 365, a couple Power BIs. We blog a couple times a week and certainly want to be a thought leader, and so check that if there's some interest areas on some things we may have discussed before. And then as a recap, remember that we do have some offers for looking at your security as a whole from a vCISO perspective. We have those free trials for the phishing test one time or the Office 365 evaluation. And certainly at the end of the day, we'd be happy to take you out for coffee or grab some lunch and have a conversation about where your security issues are. But with that, we appreciate you attending and spending some time with us, and hope that this brought some newsworthy items to light for you and your medium business.